Today, we're going to talk about a good way to build margin into your budget. Now, what is margin? Margin is just basically uh, making something presentable. Like they did a study once where if you're reading a book and you'll notice, I think it's like 10 to 20% of a page on the edge is margin, and it makes it easier to read. So, I believe in margin in your personal life, giving yourself spare time to fill with good stuff. I also believe in putting a margin in a budget, but I don't put it in the way you might typically think. In other words, I don't put a blank line item and say, here's my budget. I kind of sneak it in through the back door in a couple of ways. So I wanted to take today and show you those back ways that I create margin in my retirement projections and in my planning that seems to be working really well for me so far after about a year and 3, 4 months. So let me just kind of drop into that real quickly. So the first thing we're going to talk about is you have a miscellaneous budget, right? I'm going to talk about this over and over. You got to find a nice balance between how much to put in your miscellaneous budget, because you don't want to put too much, like to the point where it's just your entire budget. On the other hand, you don't want to start tracking. um, you don't want to be tracking every little thing, because if your budget is too hard to track and too hard to maintain, you just won't do it. So what you're seeing in this screen right now is basically my budget and how I set it up. I thought it was detailed enough to cover the major things, but not so general where it was of no use. So the first thing I want to talk about is the miscellaneous budget. So I'm a big believer in your miscellaneous budget line. One, it's probably going to be two different age brackets, right? Because I always think with all my budget line items, is this something that's going to end at a certain age, just mainly for accuracy. So I put my expenses to 77 or 78 roughly, because that's when I consider the go-go years. And then after 78, I think you just slow down a little bit. So, how did I come up with my miscellaneous expenses, which is one of the categories I use as my margin account, where I really want to be intentional and leave extra money in there, but I still want it to be relatively accurate. So, what I did, and it's probably not a bad idea for most people, I did a whole video on this, but it was early on in the series, is I went to my credit card, and this is from 2023. But what I did is I actually I did an Excel dump, which is really easy, from my credit card. So I try and stick on one credit card for the most part. I mean, I have multiple reasons I stick on one credit card, because I give my credit cards to my kids sometimes when they go on vacation, and I don't want their expenses mixed in with mine. So I give them one of my credit cards I don't use as much. Also, I just want to know that I have a lot of disposable credit, at my disposal. But I don't use a lot of it. So, but for tracking purposes, I consolidate it usually onto one credit card. So I went to that credit card, dumped it. You'll see it had a month. I had to put in, this was a transaction date. And what I did is I just used a formula that says equal month, so that it would do each month, so I could see each month. And literally what I did is I went through um, all my transactions and said, is this miscellaneous? And once I was done, I just did a filter on the top row and said, only show me miscellaneous. Once I did that, and like I said, I have a video on this. If you look at my channel, you go back. Once I did that, I did a crosstab. So for the year 2023, which I thought was a pretty normal year for us, I went and did a crosstab. And you want to do 1 year. I mean, you could do multiple years. I mean, you could do all your years, but then you're also going to have to make sure you do it by. I would do it by year too. I would do a crosstab by year as well. Um, so so you saw this was January, this was February, March, April, May, blah, 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 blah. So essentially what I did here is I said, listen, I don't want to get this wrong. Um, so the first thing I did to build slack into my budget is, as I said, instead of getting an average of this, so I could have put all these together. And then if you look down here to the right, you'll see the average is 1,191. So if I really wanted to be like on the money, I would have made my miscellaneous budget $1,200. But instead, what I said is let me just take the highest one that I do, which happens to be, October and November, and let me use that. So what you'll see in my plan is 1,700 a month. So what that does, that introduces a really large slack item that I have in my budget, so that when we're going nuts on Amazon, or if our lifestyle changes a little, I've got some slack. So the miscellaneous budget is the first one. It's probably one of the most important things you're going to do, outside of everything being important, because you screw it up. But I look at that miscellaneous budget as probably being one of the most important things you figure out, because that's your everyday little spending. And in your retirement, you really don't want to have to get nervous about that. And like I said, I use Right Capital to check this account every month to see am I in the ballpark. But that's another. I think I'll do that once a month. I'll just kind of show you where my actuals are to my plan, because it's so easy to do in Right Capital. Okay, my second form of margin that I build into my account, or slash flexibility, is budgets that accumulate. So if you watched the last video I did on how I make spending easy, which is really part of creating margin, because if you have margin in your accounts and you're comfortable, you're going to feel comfortable to spend wisely. So I have accounts where they accumulate. They don't always happen. So house emergencies, I'm not going to have a house emergency every year, but I still put in 6,000 a year into that account. And in my projections in my retirement plan, I also put in 6,000 a year all the way through. Same with appliances. I call it house lumpy spending, which, P.S., coolest thing in the world. I just put a 65-inch TV. I bought mounting brackets and everything, ran some electrical work into the back of the house. And guess what? Came out of the house budget, the house emergency repairs. I was able to have an electrician come in and put some lines in for like $400 to the back of the house, but easy to spend because I had this category that I could take from. So I have this lumpy spending for appliances too, for 24. So between these two, and these really all add up. So that's that. I have a car repairs budget. Vacations, I'm actually toying around. I said this in the last video, moving the vacations out of this yellow bracket. This yellow colored budgets are things that accumulate, because if there's one thing we spend every single year, it's vacations and gifts to family. And then we have vacation special, but we're spending those too. So I may actually move those out of these accum accounts, because I find they're not accuming. But anyhow, so I have these three major accounts, right? House emergency repairs, house lumpy spending, and car repairs. Those don't happen every year. So what I did is, you can see here, this is my second year in retirement. What I did is I went into my accounts and I said, okay, I've already got money in here. How much am I going to add in? How much did I have a carryover from last year? So in January of this year, I looked at the accounts, and I only do it once a year, carried out the balances and said, oh, this is my balance based on spendings. And how do I know that? Because of what I did earlier in the video. Whenever I move money out of one of these accounts, I put a footnote in the memo saying why. I move it from there to checking, and then I use checking to pay the credit card bill. And the reason I don't use checking to pay the credit card bill every single time is because I don't get a little memo. So that way, at the end of the year, it's really easy for me to go into these accounts and kind of back into what I have left. And there's only like 4 categories in here. You can see in the yellow, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories. So at the end of last year, I still had almost $5,000 in my emergency repairs. I didn't need any new appliances, so I had $2,400 in there, and I had zero in everything else. So what did I do? I said, what am I going to do this year? Normally I would take 6,000, so I carried it over. So I put 10,000. I put another 6,000 in that account. This has all happened in January. I didn't have to buy any appliances, so I carried that over, and that's 4,800. What I said with the car account, I didn't have any carryover last year. So normally I would put 2,400 in there, but I did a bunch of work, so I knew I'm not going to hit that many. So instead of putting in 2,400, I put in 1,400. Okay, so how does this build margin into my account? And this is where the beauty of the whole thing starts. So not only does this make it easy for me to spend, so when a house emergency comes up, it's not an emergency. I just go here and use that money. But what I'm going to do is next year, when January hits, January 2026, I'm going to go into this account and say, listen, I don't need to put any more in. I think having $11,000 as an emergency fund for my house is enough. I think having $5,000 in my appliances is enough. That should buy me at least two appliances. Who knows with inflation and appliances. But car repairs, I may just say, you know what, 14. My threshold will probably be $2,000. I'll probably be like, it's 2 grand, so I'm only going to put $600 in that account next year if I have no repairs in this account. So right away, what's going to happen is next year, if this plays out right, I'm going to have an extra $8,500 to do what I want with. Now, granted, if I get some big hit this year and I have to spend $10,000, then next year I'm going to have to start feeding this again. But this is a great practical way to do two things. One, give yourself a place for emergencies. For me, it's always a worry about the house and cars. Those are my two big ones. And appliances, because I had 4 kids and we were like washing clothes, washing dishes all the time. Fridge was always being open 24/7. So what's going to be great is the margin that's going to be built in is next year. And it actually happens that next year we're going to go on an Alaskan cruise. So with some friends. So normally I only have like $4,000 a year put away for these special vacations, $4,800 a year. But and I did spend that all this year. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this money that I'm going to have extra next year, assuming I don't get any big, massive bills. And I'm going to use that to help fund that Alaskan cruise a little bit. So there you go. Margin. Margin is awesome for that. It's very comfortable in spending. And then when Beth says, I want to do something, we can do it. But again, if I had a big house crisis, I may have to say, hon, I don't have enough to, I have 4,800 in there every year, in addition to another 3,000 for Wildwood that we go to. But blah, blah, blah. Okay. Third one. This is a little trickier, right? So just kind of get your head around this, and it works. I use inflation as a margin. So how do I use inflation as a margin? Well, first of all, we all know the concept of inflation, right? I mean, very rarely does the cost of things go down, but usually the cost of things go up. So what happens is when you go into planning is Right Capital is going to apply inflation based on what you tell it when you do the budgets. I have another video on budgeting, how to create your budget. But what it's going to do is based on the option you pick in that expense, it's going to apply an inflationary rate to that expense, which is awesome, right? Because when you see your overall success, you don't want it based on today's numbers. You want it based on the fact that every year things tend to go up in price. So even though I'm saying I need, for example, here at 2,100 in close, it's going to go up. Now I have a pretty low inflation rate applied to this. Let's go to entertainment. Maybe that's more fun. Entertainment's way more fun. So entertainment pre-78, I have it at $400 a month. That's 4,800. Now I had it at $400 a month last year too, because that's pretty steady. But look what happens. So inflation is going to say 58 to 59. So next year when I retire, what I should do in January, which like I said, if I have to do something too much that's hard, I'm not going to do it. So once a year is when I kind of have to look at everything and get things set up. But it's like an hour's worth of work. So what I should do next year in January is I should look, or probably in December, January, and look and say, oh, according to inflation, my spending, my budget for out to entertainment pre-78 should go from 4,800 to 4,944. That's what I should do. That introduces some inflation into my entertainment. And I should do that for all these things that have inflation, right? That way, when I'm in the budget board, which I guess I'll show you. There's no reason I'll show you. That's a pretty simple concept. When I'm in the budget board, which I'll do a video on this too, the difference between in Right Capital, there's projections and there's budget. So consider it projected versus actual. They're two separate different things, two separate places in the screens, two separate activities. But if I go to my budget, it's going to show me how much am I, like go current month because it's easier. I'm supposed to spend, like we've been talking about miscellaneous, right? So if you look at miscellaneous, my budgeted amount is 1,700. My average monthly spend up to now is 1,200. There's your margin. Um, but what's going to happen is for 2026, this 1,700, Right Capital is going to say, listen, this is going to go up for inflation. So let's say it says 1,800 a month. So what I should do is I should go in to this guy, update this to be 1,800, and I should do that with all my categories that are tied to inflation. And what does that do? That now gives me a little freedom to spend more. Now, so here's where I build margin. So I build margin in the account by not doing that. So the way I do things is I just leave them the way they are. So there is a chance, and I'm not saying I do this to be like restrictive, because what I'm going to do is, let's say in 3 years, I'm noticing this miscellaneous is going up. Well, what's that mean? That means inflation is really catching up with me for real. And so what I'm going to have to do is visit that piece of inflation and say, well, how much did it go up? And I'm going to have to bump this up. I'm going to have to bump up what's in the budget. I'm going to have to go into Right Capital and bump it up in the projected number too. But that's a great way. Like you do this over 3 years, and you're going to naturally be building margin into all your accounts. So that's the third way I do it. It's in doing these marginals. Remember, it's just about putting space in there for a couple reasons. I was just thinking about, I'm going to do a video on this too, but the divorce rates for people who are gray are much higher than I thought. They're like 50, 60%. And I think just like divorce rates when you're younger, money can be a lot of the cause of divorce rates or causes of divorce. So these margin accounts, like when Beth comes to me and she feels like she can't spend, I can go into this screen and say, go ahead, spend, hon. You know what? It's like year to date, I've got a budget, and our current 97% success rate is based on 1,700 a month in miscellaneous expenses. You're only spending 984. Spend. Go ahead. Spend some more. And there's nothing more than my wife loves to hear than go spend some more. And she does not spend that much. She's actually a rock star. She's really easy to deal with this stuff. But I'm saying this frees her up. It frees me up to tell her to go spend. So that's margin, which ultimately is going to help. It's going to help your marriage in a big way. I mean, if you're married. Okay, so just this budgets that accumulate thing. It's kind of funny. When we were younger, just a fun story. We used to do the envelope routine, where at the beginning of every month we'd put everything in the envelopes, and then as we were spending, we'd take from the envelopes. And we used to have friends that would laugh at us, and that's okay. They still laugh at us, even though we don't use that particular way. Where they were over one night and we didn't have money for pizza because the spending envelope was empty. So we went into the dog food envelope, and it's kind of the same principle as margins. Is the dog food envelope had accumulated money because, I mean, not because we didn't feed the dog, but just because it just turned out we were accumulating more money in there. We didn't need it. So I stole from the dog food envelope to pay for the pizza. And that's kind of the idea here too, right? Another reason for having a nice account is if something comes up you're not sure of, but you've got plenty of money sitting in there ready to go, some good dry powder, then you can just spend it from there and you can feel comfortable. Now, like I said, you got to do it right so you don't get confused, like transfer money from that account to checking, and then and write the memo, what it was all about, and then, pay off the credit card or whatever, or write a check, whatever you're going to do. So the last step real quick is let's just look at how I'm doing now, because I kind of like to show you guys real examples. So if I were to go into where I keep this account, which I have a separate account for all the yellow ones, which I just did a video on, I have 19,700 bucks in there. So if you look at that, I got 19,700, but what do I have according to my Cume amount? So we'll just click on these guys. And I do this fairly regular. So I have 24,891. So what that means is somewhere in these 5 accounts, I've spent about 5,000 bucks. It would be real easy for me. I can't do this for you because that's just showing a little too much on the screen. But if I really wanted to answer that question, what I would do is I would go into my accounts, my online accounts. I would go to this account, this yellow account, because I have a separate account for that I fund at the beginning of every year. And I would literally just say, show me transactions. And there would be a memo on each one. And I would be able to back out, which I will have to do. Like in the beginning of next year when I do these carryover things, I will figure out where they came from. Like I know I bought the TV, I bought some stuff for that. That's coming out of house. So I know some of that 5,000 is coming out of house. I think some of it's come out of gifts because we've gone to a couple weddings. So a few of those weddings, it came out of that. I don't think I've taken anything from the Vacation Wildwood Fund yet. I've definitely taken from Vacation Special Pre 62 because I had to pay. I think I had to pay for parts of the Alaskan cruise next year, so I took it out of that. So my point is, I know what's coming out, and knowledge is power. Knowledge is freedom. So this in retirement, it's so important that you're comfortable to spend, but a knowledgeable spending, not just a blind spending. Because there's going to be years, I'm sure, where I'm like, "Hun, we can't spend." We've had a rough year, whatever. But I don't even think that's going to happen because I'm using three buckets. Ultimately, I have three buckets. So in the beginning of January, when I feed this, I'll pull from the buckets that are doing well. So anyway, talk too long. Thanks so much for listening. I try and keep these short. Build margin for freedom, margin for flexibility, margin for your spouse. It helps the retirement plan greatly. So thanks again. I really appreciate your watching. Subscribe. That would be great. Talk to you later.